very warm welcome back to the channel and thank you for joining me. I wanted to do a very quick follow-up to our assessment video of the letter that Ashley Neal received following his assessment of the van driver's driving. And I wanted to do this because I thought to myself that we haven't actually talked a great deal about the quality and the standard of the driving itself. So much apart from the defamation and the privacy complaint, which we did deal with in quite a bit of detail for almost an hour in our previous video, I will link that video in the description below. I will also link in the description below Ashley's original video and Ashley's follow-up video, so you can watch those as well, so they're all in context. Because as Ashley said, this is a very important thing to talk about because there is a public interest element here, which is sort of part of one of the possible defences we brought up in the other video. A public interest, not necessarily as it sounds something the public are interested in, but something that the public should take an interest in, if you see the distinction. But as I said, one thing I didn't really comment on very much was the standard and the quality of the driving itself. Now, whilst Ashley is far better placed from a professional driver's point of view to talk about the driving, I suppose where I fit in would be to look at the laws involved, which of course Ashley deals with in some sense in some of his videos. But specifically, if I were instructed in a case of, let's say, careless driving and asked to comment on the standard of driving, I would be looking to the laws and the rules of the road, the highway code specifically. Now, I've talked about the highway code a number of times. It's not always backed up in law. Sometimes it is. But either way, they are rules to be followed. They are either must not, or should not type rules. Now, when a case gets to court, if there is a case of careless driving or even dangerous driving, and someone is accused of such things, the rules are always taken into account. And whilst I am obviously talking about England and Wales, this applies pretty universally. So even in the United States, Canada, Australia, and so on, there will be rules of the road and laws that back up some of those rules of the road. And if one were to be prosecuted for a dangerous driving or careless driving type offence, then the lawyers and ultimately the court would look at the rules of the road and whether those have been broken. So that is what I'm going to comment on just very briefly in this video now. So let's get to it. So here's a small portion of the clip that we're talking about here. Of course, Ashley has broken this down in quite a great amount of detail in terms of the driving. So I'm going to focus on just how that overlaps with the law. So we're looking at this blue van up here and how that does or does not affect the driving of the oncoming van on the other side of the road. So if we just play this clip forward just for a moment, and I'm going to pause it at one point and I'll tell you why. If we pause it here, now you can see that this, even if we run it back very, very slightly before there, you can see that the cyclist is here, just behind this car here, but in front of the white van, and this blue van is approaching. You can see that the blue van has got the brake lights on because it's about to go through a gap between this car on the left hand side, which is parked up, and the white van. But the white van is still behind the cyclist. So now if we continue on and pause again, you can see here that the blue van's decided to go for it, to go through this gap, as Ashley has described very well. And it's at this point here, I think Ashley is absolutely right in that the van really should have applied the brakes and slowed down or stopped. And the reason is very clear, and certainly in practical terms, but in law as well. And the reason is this: the white van is currently still behind the cyclist, and so whichever way we look at this, even discounting the swerve which came later, which you can head over to the other videos to check that out for, but even discounting the swerve that happens, whether or not that was related to the cyclist or the van is immaterial for the following reason. This van, as I said, is behind this cyclist. But if we play it forward, and as Ashley is zooming in on here, you can see very clearly that this white van is still behind this cyclist. The blue van, of course, is heading for the gap in between. and Ashley's doing it frame by frame here. You can see, I'm going to pause it here, which I think is incidentally where Ashley's paused the video. You can see now that the white van has definitively decided to overtake the cyclist in between it and the blue van. So regardless of whether the later swerve was anything to do with the cyclist or to do with the blue van, either way, you can probably agree that the distance between this white van and the cyclist is probably a meter or thereabouts. Certainly not 1.5 meters, which is the required distance to be left between it and any passing vehicle when overtaking. And so let's move to the law that underpins that. I say the law, this is within the highway code because the highway code rules have changed, and someone has previously highlighted, which I will say, to be fair, they've previously highlighted that there's always been a distance between a vehicle and a cyclist overtaking. That is absolutely fair enough. But the rules have been changed somewhat, but the position still is that there is a distance to be left overtaking a cyclist, and it's in Rule 163 of the Highway Code. Rule 163 currently says give motorcyclists, cyclists and horse riders and horse-drawn vehicles, etc., as much room as you would overtaking a car, and this is contained within other rules. But as a guide, it does say leave at least 1.5 meters when overtaking cyclists at speeds of up to 30 miles an hour. Now, it doesn't appear that this van was doing 30 miles an hour, but it does say up to 30 miles an hour, and either way, it has not been that much space between the van and the cyclist. So either way you look at it, the van should have held back, and that is certainly how I would look at it. If there were a collision between the two vans, or the van of the cyclist, or anything else, notwithstanding the swerve that happens later, see the other videos for that, but notwithstanding all of that, either way you look at it, both as a barrister and I believe a court would take the view that this driver was in the wrong because they overtook the cyclist without leaving enough space in accordance with the highway code rules and the new priorities. I say the new priorities, it's set the new priorities firmly that everybody should follow. You might remember my very, very older video where I said it's going to be a little bit like mayhem. And I said that because I believed people wouldn't follow the rules and other people might trust them to follow the rules. And this is perhaps just a good illustration of why those rules are there, because those rules dictate the distance that should be left between these vehicles. And in my view, that distance clearly wasn't left there. So there it is. I hope you found that breakdown interesting vis-a-vis the law and how a court would look at a situation like this when comparing and considering the rules. And ultimately, I think this whole situation could have been avoided. Indeed, the mediator in me, I'm also a mediator as well as a barrister, the mediator in me would have said, try to avoid the confrontation. Even if the letter was sent, a letter could be sent in a very different way rather than threatening an action and so on. A simple request, not necessarily even admitting any wrongdoing. It wouldn't need to do that, but it could have simply made a request rather than making a threat of proceedings. But that's the mediator in me speaking. The mediator in me, and in fact, as part of my duty as a barrister, when I advise somebody, is usually to try to avoid litigation at all costs. No pun intended. Not least of which because the courts and the rules require and sometimes insist that court is a last resort, but also because the parties are going to go to great cost and expense and spend a lot of time and stress over this situation if indeed they have to fight it out in court. So as I say, very often our advice is to avoid litigation as much as you possibly can. With that said, I hope you found that interesting. I hope you watch all of the other videos I've linked in the description below. Please do remember to like the video and subscribe. And as I said, thank you for allowing me to thank my sponsor. They help this channel to keep going. And as always, thank you for watching.